Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is Zach Dennis, your host, with a quick aside before we start this episode. We are running a new promo at cinematary.com and giving away some copies of The King of Staten Island. That is the latest from celebrated comedy director Judd Apatow, and it stars SNL star Pete Davidson. The heartfelt comedy is going to be available on digital, Blu-ray, and DVD on August 25th. But before that happens, Cinematary is offering you a chance to win a copy for free. It's real easy. All you got to do is send us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram a picture of you subscribing to the Cinematary podcast. Let us know that you are a subscriber and that you appreciate the podcast. Also, hey, for the heck of it, why don't you throw in a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. But if you have not heard of The King of Staten Island or are wondering what you get with this Blu-ray and DVD, you get features of over 2 hours of hilarious, never-before-seen bonus content, including alternate endings, deleted scenes, and a gag reel. This film, of course, was inspired by Pete Davidson's own true-life story and also stars Marissa Tomei, Bill Burr, Bel Powley, Maude Apatow, and Steve Buscemi. And the Rolling Stone call it an emotional and comic knockout. Again, this is the latest work from Judd Apatow, and Pete Davidson is one that I know a lot of people are big fans of. So if you are a fan of Apatow or Davidson and you want to get a copy of The King of Staten Island, be sure to subscribe to Cinematary, or at least show us that you have subscribed to Cinematary, and send that to our Facebook, our Instagram, or our Twitter. I usually call those out at the end of the episode. Thank you again. Now let's start the episode. Welcome to episode 312 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford,
Jessica Carr,
Michael O'Malley.
And on today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1979's Stalker. Because I guess we decided that in the 1970s, we're going to watch a bunch of movies that are over 2.5 hours long. That's what we did for this series. It is what it is. Real quickly, head over to cinematary.com. We're about to talk about 2 of these movies, but you can see written reviews of both Black is King and She Dies Tomorrow on the site, so please check that out, as well as a review of Bloodshot, the new Vin Diesel movie. You can find all of those at cinematary.com, but let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And Andrew, you and Michael had one that you wanted to kick off with.
Yeah, so we both saw a new indie that did well at, I think, South by Southwest last year. A movie's called Yes, God, Yes. Great title. It is directed by, it's the feature debut of Karen Maine, who was one of the co-writers on Obvious Child, favorite of Jessica Carr. And I don't know how good this movie technically is, in the final analysis, but it is honestly one of the more delightful things I've watched recently. I really appreciated the opportunity to watch it. The basic premise is that it's about a young girl discovering her own sexuality and specifically discovering masturbation while she's living in a very repressed Christian Catholic community. She goes to a Catholic high school, and much of the film takes place at a weekend retreat. It's actually like a very specific Catholic weekend retreat that I know friends of mine went to in middle school and high school. I don't remember the name of it, but it's the one where they give you the little like Jerusalem cross necklace, the one that looks like a waffle at the end of it. I hate that I can't remember the name of this camp, but most of the film is kind of a boilerplate teen sex comedy with the caveat that the characters are very repressed for the most part. I felt like the jokes landed really well for what it's worth. I really appreciated the lead actress, Natalia Dyer, who people will know from Stranger Things. She is cast to play this almost silent protagonist, really, really closed off to other people. And almost all of her characterization is done through reaction shots, facial expressions. She does a really, really good job. And the movie is at its best when it's just her alone carrying a scene. So there are these scenes where she's, like I said, exploring her sexuality. There's one where she's in a chat room on her parents' computer. There's one where she's on her cell phone in her camp bunk. There's two when she's peeping on someone. And these are scenes where there's almost it feels extremely different on a formal level from the rest of the movie. Almost no dialogue. Shots are much longer. Scenes are much longer. The pace is much slower. Most of the film is really speedy, both for good and for ill. This movie is only 77 minutes long, but those scenes when she's kind of alone and experimenting with stuff, they also have this fun use of non-diegetic music as the character will get into a mood and then be rapidly ripped out of that mood by somebody walking in the room or being in earshot of her. And where the movie ultimately kind of falls short is on the thematic or storytelling level. I'll let Michael speak more to this, but the shots that it takes at Christian youth culture, pretty cheap, pretty undeveloped. And although I was not raised Catholic, I'm familiar with these kinds of camps, and I had a similar Christian upbringing, and so from experience, I know that this is a little bit more nuanced than the movie gives it credit for being, as much as I kind of respect its position on things. It has this really thudding finale, I think, where the protagonist is directly delivering the message of the movie, the very simplistic message of the movie, directly to the audience while standing behind a literal pulpit. And again, that message is maybe not as fleshed out as it needs to be. So, Michael, what are some of your thoughts about this movie?
I liked it. You're maybe talking about it in slightly more positive terms than I would. I thought it was good. I really liked. The best part was Natalia Dyer, and the way that she's filmed, like you were talking about, where she barely has any dialogue, but she's definitely the most fleshed out character, which is a really neat thing that the movie's able to pull off. Regarding the themes that you were talking about, I for one welcome more masturbation in movies about Christianity.
Yes.
But
that's your takeaway.
I think
as Michael is pro masturbation in movies.
Specifically Christian movies.
Even better.
If God's Not Dead had those guys jerking it every movie, that would be better. But so basically, and I mean I'm maybe simplifying the movie a tad. The movie is well observed enough that there's interesting social dynamics to observe. But basically, as far as Christianity and repressed sexuality goes, it kind of takes the kind of classic stance of Christianity's sexual repression is bad because they're all they're hypocrites, right? The people who tell you to be sexually pure are not sexually pure themselves, which I mean is certainly true sometimes. There's a priest in this movie who looks at porn and stuff, and I'm sure that
though I heard referenced on another podcast that the movie's treatment of porn is pretty anachronistic. This movie takes place in I think the late 90s or the early 2000s.
Yeah, there's AOL chat
there was
rooms
no streaming. There was no streaming high def porn in the early 2000s on the internet.
Yeah. Whatever the case may be, he's watching porn on his computer. And while I'm sure that happens, what I found growing up Christian is yes, hypocrisy, but also there's a lot of people who are really sincere and completely buy into the stuff and buy into it with a reasonable degree of fidelity to the ideas as well. And I think that a lot of times movies about religion don't get into that. I think people are really interested in there's deception going on, and that's not the case, but I don't think movies deal as much with people who have sincere beliefs that hurt people, for example, sincere beliefs that masturbation is a sin, or a sincere belief that X, Y, or Z. And I think this movie would be more interesting if it had some characters who were like that. Honestly, the most, seems like, one of the more sincere characters in the movie is actually the protagonist, who is going through like her own like psychological journey, and a lot of her journey involves learning things about like the people she looks up to and finding out that like they're full of it. And like I said, I'm not saying that that's not like a thing that happens to people a lot, but I also think that skirts the issue of having to engage with the ideas of the religion itself, right? If you can say that like, oh, Christians don't practice what they preach, then you're dealing with like their behavior, not so much what they preach. And like I kind of feel like to have like that fully fleshed out nuance thing that you're talking about, Andrew, I would have liked to have seen both. Like, I think the movie,
and ultimately, like what it does with that notion that people are hypocritical is like offer this like pat message that I would be more expecting in like a children's film. They're like, we should just not judge each other so much, like that's ultimately kind of a hollow and not like maybe not specific enough message.
Yeah, and I mean like there's really nice, well-observed scenes, and like there's, for instance, like a scene that is a little bit out of place in the movie, I think, but like works really well in isolation, where like the protagonist has snuck off or run off from the camp and like finds herself in like a local dive bar and has just this random conversation with a lapsed Catholic. And I think that like that is a really interesting and like meaningful scene in isolation. And like there's a lot of interesting, well-observed scenes in isolation, but as far as like knitting together like a complex thesis, it is a little bit simplistic. And especially like the resolution of the movie involves like a kind of gotcha, like by revealing to the hypocrites that like, I know your secret and therefore I have power over you, which again, like I think like that, I don't know, like that doesn't, that's a little bit like a wish fulfillment ending, at least as far as like my experiences with Christianity. You more often than not run into, the true believers who it doesn't matter what you catch them in. They're ultimately, their principles are more important than their, whatever compromising thing that you can say about them specifically. And I mean, like,
and the chances of you catching them in something like that are very, very low.
Right. I mean, Exhibit A right now, I mean, not to derail this completely, and I'll shut up about this, but like, Jerry Falwell Jr. was just like put on administrative leave from Liberty University because he actually was like, accidentally posted compromising pictures on social media.
Which, to be fair, was like a costume party.
No, this is a different thing.
I agree.
This is a different thing.
Oh, really?
He like posted like a picture of him with someone who was not his wife, like a woman who was not his wife. Like they both had like drinks of ambiguous nature, and their pants were unzipped and things like that.
No. That is the costume party. They were dressed as characters from Trailer Park Boys.
Oh.
And he said in the caption that the thing he was drinking was not alcohol. It was just part of the costume.
Well, anyway. Regardless, it was enough to put him on administrative leave because that guy is definitely one of the hypocrites. However, you still have the army of Liberty University admins, who are like sincere true believers, ostensibly. And so, putting Jerry Falwell in administrative jail doesn't actually do anything to change the culture of Liberty University tangibly. And I kind of felt that way by the end of this movie. But I agree with a lot of the positive things.
Yeah, so worth watching if you're looking for something kind of light and fun. But, not...
And it's like less than an hour 20.
Yeah,
so
77 minutes.
Like, what have you got to lose?
Right. We rented it on iTunes. For a little while, it was able to rent through Central Cinema, though I don't think they're doing it anymore. But I think... it is on Central Cinema. If you want to watch it, go to centralcinema865.com and give our local theater some money, because they have not been open in months.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to shift gears to Jessica. I mentioned before you reviewed this movie for the site, but tell us a little bit about She Dies Tomorrow.
Okay, so let's talk about anxiety, everybody. Just kidding. Yeah, but seriously, it's a problem. But I watched She Dies Tomorrow which was directed by Amy Seimetz. You might know her from, she starred in the film, the remake of Pet Sematary, and she has also worked on some other films, so she's an actress and a filmmaker, which is pretty cool. And thank you to Neon for letting Cinematary have a screener of this movie, so we got to check it out before it was released to streaming, which was really awesome. But yeah, like, I would like people to go read my review because I worked hard on it, but in summation, I think that the film is actually like a really nuanced way to look at anxiety. I know that a lot of horror films try to capture the feeling of anxiety, but it's not really someone's personal struggle with it, like literally. It's usually done in a form of like a monster or some other like even just visual that gives you that. But Amy,
can I ask you a question about that, Jessica?
Yes.
In your review, you mentioned that you think it's the best movie about anxiety you've ever seen. Were there specific titles that you had in mind as like inferior versions of this movie?
Well, I mean, not exactly, but I think like you mentioned the Babadook in your Letterboxd review, and like I think that the Babadook is a really great movie, but it also like is able to lean on the fact that it is a literal monster that is there, and I think that She Dies Tomorrow handles it differently because it is not able to. Like, the movie is about a woman who thinks that she is going to die the next day, and she passes that idea around like a contagion to her friends, and they in turn also believe that they're going to die the next day. And so there isn't really like a literal monster that is coming after them. It is just this thought that has been placed in their head and has rooted itself in them. And so it, like, even just hearing that synopsis, how in the world are you able to make that fear real in your audience whenever they're watching it? And I think that she does that by making it relatable and making it an intimate film. And also, like, visually, she does a lot of interesting things where there is kind of like a light cue to let you know that the character has the contagion planted in them and they think that they are going to die the next day. And that
really
part,
cool.
yeah,
I mean, it's almost like a police siren or something. You'll get these pulses of like blue and red and purple and pink lights. Sometimes like coming from behind the camera with the actor looking directly into the camera. Other times from off to the side as a character is kind of being haunted by a lingering thought or something. I really like how simplistic and effective that trick is.
I was going to say that it's just interesting because also the characters react to it in different ways. Some of them are terrified, some of them are fascinated, but like at the end of the sequence, they believe that they're going to die the next day.
I was going to say during those sequences too are really like a lot of the movie is kind of like mumblecore-y, you know, like kind of lo-fi aesthetic, naturalistic, that kind of stuff. And then those sequences, like it immediately jumps into like this like, you know, a highly stylized, like assaultive aesthetic, like really suddenly. And I think that that's, I mean, it's not, like it's not really a jump scare, but like what it does is, yeah, where it like ratchets up noise and like sensory input in a way that is uncomfortable, and I thought that was really cool because I don't know, like it is a little like, I don't know, there is a little bit of like an involuntary reaction of like anxiety to like that specific like way that the sensory input is happening, in comparison to the rest of the movie, which is like almost almost drab. Like it's not drab in like a negative way, but like it's it's the kind of movie that you watch it and you know what the next shot is going to be. It's not like a particularly surprising aesthetic until
Well, sort of. I mean, you're right that it has a mumblecore vibe to it. There's a lot of mumblecore adjacent people in and associated with this movie. Like Kentucker Audley is in this movie. Adam Wingard is in this movie. The Moorhead and Benson are co-producers. But one thing that I've heard pointed out about the editing is that, I mean, and this is not like visual aesthetic, but in terms of like how the movie is put together, I found this kind of unconventional. The movie will often, it ends scenes on a cliffhanger and goes on to the next scene and then never really circles back around to the cliffhanger. It will just kind of show you that character that you were waiting on resolution from in a completely different context the next time you see them. And so the movie is like always sort of leaving you on edge as to what the fate of these characters are. I thought that was really a good observation.
That is true. And I wasn't meaning to like say, I know the words like have traditionally negative connotations, but I didn't mean anything like negative about the rest of the movie. It's just that there's like a different quality to the sequences in which like the anxiety like onset of the characters happens compared to the rest of the movie. But yeah, like on a narrative level, like it's like watching the final scene of The Sopranos like for an hour and a half.
Yeah, and it's not a very comfortable viewing experience. I had to sit with the movie for a long time before I eventually was like, yes, I actually really loved this. And it's kind of like a reading between the lines situation where you have to sit with it and realize that there are lots of choices that she made with the film that are really smart. And in that way, it is able to resonate with its audience better, I think.
I will echo that and say that it is very hard to watch. I mean, to the point of both of y'all, I think the movie is very effective at sort of transmitting the feeling that the characters are experiencing onto the viewer, which is like both really, really not fun and also proof of the movie's concept that like somebody expressing their own personal inner demons kind of becomes contagious and plants ideas in the mind of the person listening. And so the movie is really raw, really personal. The first thing I did as soon as we finished watching it was I needed to like look up interviews with Amy Seimetz to like hear her talk about what her own personal experiences have been with not only anxiety, but also depression and suicidal ideation. And the movie is coming from such a real place. And it's been marketed by a lot of critics as like a pandemic movie, which it kind of technically accidentally is. But I honestly think that take is both reductive and somewhat offensive to like take both an experience that's like very personal to the creator and also very universal to a lot of people and say like, oh, this is just about coronavirus. Like this was a mindset this person was in before coronavirus. And to say that it's just a pandemic film is, I think, kind of missing the mark. But yeah, I mean, it's really successful at what it does to the point of being downright uncomfortable. And if you, I mentioned with Yes God Yes that like watch that if you're looking for a nice fluffy piece of entertainment. But if you are not looking for a nice fluffy piece of entertainment, and you're up to something that's kind of powerful and confrontational, you should definitely check out She Dies Tomorrow.
Yeah, and I also encourage you to read my review, please, because it is very long. It is over 1,000 words, and I generally don't do that. But to read my review and to seriously sit down and watch the movie, because I had someone read my review and then message me and say that I convinced them to watch it. So, because they were very nervous about watching it because of the whole anxiety aspect. So, read my review, watch the movie. It will be uncomfortable, but I do believe that there is some sort of catharsis in there.
Nice. It's going to be available rental streaming, correct?
I think it is now. Let me see.
Yeah, it came out the 31st of July.
Yes, you can rent it on Amazon and also probably a lot of other places.
Well, shifting over to Disney Plus, I mentioned it at the top of the episode. I mentioned it last week. We have a review on Cinematary from Courtney Anderson of Black is King, but that is the new film new visual album from Beyonce.
It's a film.
I just did that to annoy Andrew.
Doesn't it say a film by
It does.
Beyonce on the
both
in the movie?
this and Homecoming have the subtitles "A Film by Beyonce."
Okay, good. I thought I had misremembered it for a second.
Well, Letterboxd says this visual album from Beyonce. So anyway, whatever it is, it's better than the Disney Lion King live action thing. So just boot that shit into the sky. So this is pretty much the film adaptation of Beyonce's album that she did in conjunction with The Lion King, which I think some of those songs appeared like in the actual movie, but it also was kind of its own living, breathing thing. It dropped on Disney Plus a few weeks ago. I mean, I enjoyed it. My kind of initial thoughts from it was it definitely didn't. It really didn't have the cohesiveness that like Homecoming Lemonade had, where a lot of the songs kind of meshed together. It felt like this whole kind of a singular experience. This one very much felt like it was sequence 1, sequence 2, sequence 3. Like you could feel kind of the delineation between each sequence, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that there was a couple of them that stood out, but overall, I kind of was, I don't know, I was kind of left expecting a little bit more. You also have like these interludes of like lines and line readings from The Lion King. There's something weird, at least in my opinion, about you have this visual album from Beyonce, and then you have Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner as Timon and Pumbaa, like doing a voiceover type thing. Like that just seems like and like at the same time, Beyonce is like in a car driving through the Sahara.
And like in Lemonade, those little interstitials are like these beautiful poems by Warson Shire. And in this, it's like
it's Timon and Pumbaa. It's,
well, and there's like that added dissonance of like it's the familiar lines from The Lion King, but with the new voice actors, and so it's like doubly distracting.
Oh yeah, and as someone who never saw the new Lion King, yeah, it is doubly distracting because not only are you like these lines should not be in here, but the delivery of these lines is not what it needs to be. It's not good acting.
Because you have Beyonce, who's very much doing her own thing. Like she's kind of she's using like the mythology of the Lion King to kind of make this completely other statement. Like she's literally reinterpreting the story of the Lion King in a different way. And then it's almost like the reason why she could make this was Disney was like, listen, we're going to need you to spice in a little bit of our crappy movie to like validate offering you the rights to have sequences from our Disney movie or whatever, which maybe is not what happened, but I also
Michael's theory was that they asked her to voice Nala in The Lion King, and she was like, on one condition will I do that.
But yeah, Michael, Andrew, what did you all make of Black is King?
I thought it was good. I enjoyed the visuals a lot, which like I agree with you, Zach, that it's like there's like distinct movements and that basically map to the individual songs, but like that's not too bad. They all kind of revolve around the same theme of like African diaspora identity and stuff, which I thought like is like pretty coherent, even if like the narrative is, if there is one, is a little bit opaque at times. I liked how it looked. I guess like with it's not really fair to compare it to Lemonade entirely, because I feel like this project maybe didn't have it just wasn't set up to be as like the scope of Lemonade. But with Lemonade, like at every single moment, you felt, or at least I felt, like there is something really beautiful and interesting going on that contributes to like complexifying this overall like narrative and theme. And with this movie, the individual moments I think make the theme louder, but they don't always make it more complex. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's fine to have like your thesis statement that you just kind of repeat in various like iterations, but I think that that's what was holding it back for me really from like tipping over into next level, is that like after a certain point I felt like it was not like the individual sections didn't add more to me. They just like underlined what was already there. And that seemed like maybe a limitation. But I know other people really liked it. Like Courtney really liked it in her review, I think. So
I think she's conflicted about it, despite her review skewing very positive. She said on Twitter that like her Cinematary review was like the nicest thing she could think to say about Black is King.
Nice.
I think she has broader criticisms of Beyonce, what Beyonce is currently engaging in as like a billionaire, that she kind of left out.
yeah, I have thoughts about that too, but it's kind of, it feels weird to say it in the context of this project when I'm not like
Sure.
a Black person.
I will majorly agree with your point, though, that whereas Lemonade feels like a very complex wrestling with a lot of interrelated themes, this mostly feels like a repeated underlining of the same theme over and over. And I also think that the way the movie is tethered to The Lion King as a concept is sort of not only limiting in how like The Lion King kind of pulls me out of the experience, but also when you have to work with the language of The Lion King to like make your metaphors, that kind of weakens your metaphors on a certain level. Like The Lion King is basically like a pro-monarchy movie, and if that seems like a controversial take, you should go watch the video essay about The Lion King by YouTuber Big Joel. That is a very persuasive video essay about the ideology of The Lion King. And so like what Beyonce means to do, it seems from like the text of this film, is to like kind of like use the idea of kingship to combat the emasculation of like specifically black men. She dedicates it to her son that has kind of like been faced by the African American community for generations. But like what she means by king is not really what a king is. Like there are little narrations interspersed throughout here where they talk about like being a king means like taking responsibility, and being a king means equality, and like no, that's not what being a king means. But like if I can kind of lay aside all of the kind of tangential stuff and the subtextual stuff, I will emphasize how stunning it is visually, just like Lemonade. I think with that, that project is one of the more visually innovative and powerful film things of the last decade. And even though this doesn't really measure up to it on certain levels, it does have just like so much top caliber image making happening all over the place. Like the first moment I really was kind of taken aback by it. There's a scene in I think, or the shot in the second song where she's laying atop this, like not in a pool of water, but on top of a pool of water that is surrounded by sand, and the water is like reflecting her body, but it's also reflecting like the cosmos behind her body. And these are the kind of images that you will find just all over the place, like every 5 minutes in this movie. And like it obviously did not need to be as visually ambitious as it is, both in terms of like cinematography and visual effects, but also costume design and hair and makeup and all those things. Music is also very good too. I mean, it's not quite as like powerful on a song by song level as something like Lemonade, but I enjoyed listening to basically every song here. So I mean, for me, it's kind of I'm in my head these two like impulses are fighting each other, like the aesthetic experience of Black is King and the more like structural or thematic experience of it. They don't really mesh in my mind, but I do ultimately still admire Beyonce as a director. Like, she's one of the best working directors I feel like we have now, whatever that means as her role as director.
No, I completely agree, because it's like, if you set aside all of the stuff that you laid out that I agree with, at the same time, if this is like lesser Beyonce in terms of directed work, like it's so much more interesting than anybody else's lesser work. Like, it's
so much more interesting than literally anything on Disney Plus, probably.
Exactly. Like, it's so like visually engaging. Like, even the stuff that, like, I wasn't super into the sequence with like the palace, and then Jay-Z shows up, and when Jay-Z shows up, like my eyes glaze over and I'm like, I don't give a shit. But it's still like visually engaging. Like, all of that is really, and so it's kind of, it did leave me thinking, just because a lot of it was so, it's just kind of washing over you with just these incredibly engaging visuals, that I'm like, oh, I forgot that I also have a lot of questions about the, what this is saying. Ariel, do you have any thoughts on Black is King?
You're just gonna bring in a fifth person without introducing the fact that there's a fifth person?
My friend Ariel is here, and she saw Black is King, and she can talk to it.
I'm a huge Beyonce fan. I just prefer Beyonce's personal stuff more than I'll ever like anything that's connected to Disney.
Well, that's how we feel about a lot of stuff,
Yeah, like Lemonade, because the Lemonade music didn't come out that much longer before the visual album, right? Like, this album had been...
Didn't they come out at the same time?
I want to list the album for this came out last year with the movie.
Right.
Yeah, but Lemonade, I thought it was the same day.
Well, I had, and this might be because I like am on Tidal and like I get Beyonce's emails or whatever, but
well, don't brag.
I feel like I had heard one or two Lemonade songs before I saw it, but like this, I'd heard the whole album. I've been listening to it for forever, so it was less overwhelming, I guess. Like Lemonade, I was like, holy shit, I need to get HBO.
Yeah, that must have been a title thing, because I'm trying to think. I think the I want to say HBO, the movie came out on HBO, and then the album dropped like at the same time. So
yeah, that may have been a title thing. Well, Formation was at the Super Bowl, so there was that.
Yeah.
Hey, question. Me and Michael have been talking about this, and neither of us have a good answer. There was also kind of a visual album connected to her self-titled record. Do you know if that was strung together as like a feature film where like one song would go directly into the next one, or was it presented as just like a bunch of music videos?
I think that was just a bunch of music videos. I feel like I've never seen self-titled strung together anywhere, because self-titled was the one that was like, surprise, it's like 11:30 and Beyonce made music. Right? Yeah. No, I feel like I've only seen them as separate stuff.
Yeah. It's really interesting how she, in Lemonade and in this, is able to like create almost like a narrative through line with 10 or so music videos, and like enrich the experience with these little interstitials, like the poems from Worcestershire that I was talking about with Lemonade. And it really feels like kind of a new film form in a way that hasn't really been done by many other people that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I was telling Zach the other day, I think we are probably getting to the era where it's going to be less like watching Beyonce's ass on stage and like more stuff for her babies. I think there's going to be more and more films like this, more and more Disney Plus collaboration. She has 3 kids. She's like, what, 36 or 37? Which is not to say...
I think she's immortal, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, she'll never die or whatever, but... I feel like we're leaning towards that, which means I need to go see a Beyonce concert, like, now.
Well, if you have Disney Plus, you can watch Black is King, and you do not have to pay $30. So that's,
That's just...
That's a nice incentive. I'm so sorry again to this poor movie, The Assistant.
Oh my God.
We're at the 40-minute mark on part 1, so
we were gonna talk about The Assistant, a movie we've talked about before on the show that got cut for time, and here we are, cutting it for time.
Oh my God,
Zach,
That's
you need to write
amazing.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Kitty Green.
director of this film, and say what a pleasure it was to have watched her movie.
And the irony is, it's quite honestly one of my favorite movies from 2020 so far. It was really good.
Oh, unquestionably one of the best movies of 2020.
Keeps getting shafted.
But we're not going to talk about it, so...
But we're not going to talk about it.
Bye.
We're going to leave you in suspense. You just got to go watch it yourself.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back talking 1979 Stalker after this.
Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is your favorite Filipino podcaster, Jessica Carr. I'm here to let you know about a couple of things that Cinematary offers that you might not know about. First, if you're a fan of what Cinematary is doing, please consider joining us on Patreon. Remember when we weren't clamoring for your dollars? Well, now we're just clamoring for 5 of your dollars. So please help us and donate to our Patreon, and then you'll get exclusive content from our staff, including our Film Theory and Chill series, where a panel takes a piece of theory each month and deconstructs it before diving into whatever topic is on their mind from the past week. The $5 each month is investment in the website and the podcast, and it goes solely to paying our writers for the reviews each week, so please consider doing it. It's only $5. If you missed an episode of Cinematary or a piece of writing we've had, you should consider signing up for our free newsletter. Each Sunday, we send out a note with the latest podcast episode, piece of Patreon content, and the last 2 reviews that we've written at cinematary.com. It's perfect for those of you who are interested in what's happening, and it makes sure that you don't miss a single Cinematary review. Finally, the easiest thing that you can do to help us is to please give us a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever else you're using to listen to the show. This helps us get more eyeballs and ears on the podcast and the website, and it helps the people know about Cinematary, which is really what we're here for. So to recap, consider donating to our Patreon, sign up for the free newsletter, and give us a rating or review. We would really appreciate if you could do these things. Thank you for listening, and now back to the show.
We are back with part 2 of episode 312 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1979 Stalker. This is directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. It's our first Tarkovsky film on Cinematary. He also did the script along with Boris Strugatsky and Arkady Strugatsky, who also wrote a book called Roadside Picnic, which is what this is based on. The film stars Alexander Kazdanovsky.
Wait. Can we appreciate for a moment that the book that this is based on is called Roadside Picnic?
I mean, that's what this movie is. It's like a road, it's just some dudes. It's some boys hanging out in the zone, just having a picnic, talking about life.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's probably a road in there somewhere. Guys being dudes.
Guys being guys.
Just laying in some toxic waste.
The film stars Alexander Kazdanovsky, Anatoly Salantensyan, and Nikolai Grinko. Thank you for my Russian. In an unnamed country at an unspecified time, there is a fiercely protected post-apocalyptic wasteland known as the Zone. An illegal guide whose mutant child suggests unspeakable horrors within the zone leads a writer and a scientist into the heart of devastation in search of a mythical place known as only as the Room. Anyone who enters the room will supposedly have any of his or her earthly desires immediately fulfilled. After reading the novel Roadside Picnic, Tarkovsky initially recommended it to a friend, the film director Mikhail Kalatozov, thinking he might be interested in adapting it into a film. He abandoned the project when he could not obtain the rights to the novel, so Tarkovsky then became very interested in adapting it and expanding its concepts. He hoped it would allow him to make a film which conforms to the classical Aristotelian unity, a single action on a single location within 24 hours in a single point of time. The film departs considerably from the novel. According to an interview with Tarkovsky in 1979, the film has basically nothing in common with the novel, except for the two words stalker and zone. Yet several...
No roadside picnic either.
There is no roadside picnic. Yet several similarities remain between the novel and the film. In both works, the zone is guarded by a police or military guard, apparently authorized to use deadly force. The stalker in both works tests the safety of his path by tossing nuts and bolts tied with scraps of cloth, verifying that gravity is working as usual. A character named Hedgehog or Porcupine is a mentor to Stalker. In the novel, frequent visits to the zone increase the likelihood of abnormalities in the visitor's offspring. Also in the book, the Stalker's daughter has light hair all over her body, while in the film she is crippled. Neither in the novel nor in the film do the women enter the zone. Oh, so I guess it's not a he or her type situation. Finally, the target of the expedition in both works is a wish-granting device. I didn't realize the zone was...
No girls allowed.
No
in
girls
God's
allowed
light.
in the zone.
No girls in the zone. Tarkovsky viewed the idea of the zone as a dramatic tool to draw out the personalities of the three protagonists, particularly the psychological damage from everything that happens to the idealistic views of the stalker as he finds himself unable to make others happy. Quote, "This too is what Stalker is about. The hero goes through moments of despair when his faith is shaken, but every time he comes to a renewed sense of his vocation to serve people who have lost their hopes and illusions." In an interview, the production designer recalled that Tarkovsky spent a year shooting a version of the outdoor scenes of Stalker. However, when the crew returned to Moscow, they found that all the film had been improperly developed and their footage was unusable. The film had been shot on a new Kodak 5247 stock, with which Soviet laboratories were not very familiar. Even before this film stock problem was discovered, relations between Tarkovsky and Stalker's first cinematographer, Gregory Rearberg, had deteriorated. After seeing the poorly developed material, Tarkovsky fired Rearberg. By the time the film stock defect was discovered, Tarkovsky had shot all of the outdoor scenes and had abandoned them. The production designer contends that Tarkovsky was so despondent that he wanted to abandon further work on the film. After the loss of the film stock, the Soviet film boards wanted to shut the film down, but Tarkovsky came upon them with a solution. He asked to be allowed to make a two-part film, which meant additional deadlines and more funds. He ended up reshooting almost all of the film with a new cinematographer, and according to the production designer, the finished film of Stalker is completely different from the one that he originally shot. The documentary film Rearberg and Tarkovsky, The Reverse Side of Stalker, offers a different interpretation of the relationship between the two men. In that, Rearberg felt that Tarkovsky was not ready for this script. He told him to rewrite the script in order to achieve a good result. Tarkovsky ignored him and continued shooting. After several arguments, Tarkovsky sent him home. Ultimately, Tarkovsky shot Stalker 3 times, consuming over 16,000 feet of film. People who have seen both the first version shot by Rearberg and the final theatrical release say that they are almost identical. Tarkovsky sent home other crew members in addition to Rearberg, excluding them from the credits as well. Several people involved in the film production, including Tarkovsky, died from causes that some crew members attributed to the film's long shooting schedule and toxic locations. Sound designer Vladimir Sharon recalled, quote, "We were shooting near Tallinn in the area around the small river Zhagala, I didn't say that correctly. With a half-functioning hydroelectric station. Up the river was a chemical plant, and it poured out poisonous liquids downstream. There's even this shot in Stalker, snow falling in the summer and white foam floating down the river. In fact, it was some horrible poison. Many women in our crew got allergic reactions on their faces. Tarkovsky died from cancer of the right bronchial tube, and Tola Solon-Tyson too. That it was all connected to the location shooting for Stalker became clear to me when Larissa, oh my gosh, these Russian names, Tarkov Voskala died from the same illness in Paris. Upon its release, the film's reception was less than favorable. Officials at Gostinko, a government group otherwise known as the State Committee for Cinematography, were critical of the film. On being told that Stalker should be faster and more dynamic, Tarkovsky replied, quote, "The film needs to be slower and duller at the start so that the viewers who walked into the wrong theater have time to leave before the main action starts." The Gostinko representative then stated that he was trying to give the point of view of the audience. Tarkovsky supposedly retorted, quote, "I am only interested in the view of two people. One is called Bresson, and the other is called Bergman."
We stand. We stand Tarkovsky.
So, on that note, let's dive into Stalker. Andrew, I'm going to start with you. I know that you've studied a number of Tarkovsky's works, and so I guess kind of laid the groundwork, I guess, in terms of, I mean, where does Stalker stand for you? Is it one of your favorites of his work, or, I mean, how do you feel about this one?
I mean, I will say at the outset, I am not this particular podcast Tarkovsky expert. That would be one Mr. Michael O'Malley, who has kind of helped me understand and appreciate Tarkovsky in recent years. Though I will also say that, my perspective on Stalker has changed a lot since I first watched it. This is showing my age a little bit, but I watched Stalker back in 2015 for the first time, and that was a year where I sort of discovered slow cinema as a concept, and didn't like a lot of it. Like, I watched and disliked Uncle Boonmee Who Can Recall His Past Lives that year. I disliked Alhazard Balthazar that year. I disliked Stalker that year. But I also found things like Beau Travail and John Dillman that I liked. And then the next year I saw Meek's Cutoff, and the rest is history. But basically my original contention with Stalker was the same as the studio executives, that it is boring. And I was very bored and unengaged by it for a couple of reasons. I didn't really have the literacy in this style of film back in 2015 when I watched this. I didn't really know how to watch a movie like this. And I also, it was one of my first Tarkovsky movies. I think I had just seen this and Solaris. And even though Solaris is like his most famous movie and the movie that a lot of people start with, it's probably not a very good starting point for Tarkovsky. But like, after I watched the movie and somebody tried to explain to me that it's about Christianity, I was like, well, how? You have to develop a literacy for decoding the way that Tarkovsky is making meaning through his film. And one of the other things that kind of helped me for this viewing is that between viewing 1 and viewing 2, I also read Tarkovsky's memoir, I guess you could say, his book on film, which is called Sculpting in Time. And one quote in particular I used in my most recent video essay, and I think is particularly helpful for talking about Stalker. He says, "Art affects a person's emotions, not his reason. Its function is, as it were, to turn and loosen the human soul, making it receptive to good." And I think that the slowness and the atmosphere of Stalker is reaching for that particular effect, to kind of get you to let your guard down to a certain extent. You have to you have to kind of like allow yourself to enter this like somewhat hypnagogic space that Tarkovsky is creating for you, so that some of the ideas and the thematic spiritual resonances of the film, to sound kind of new agey about it, are able to work on you in like the culminating moments in the last couple of scenes. Jessica, I'm kind of curious. This is not your first Tarkovsky movie, but it is your first time watching Stalker. What did you make of this?
Yeah, so in my head, nothing will top Ivan's Childhood, which is a nearly perfect film. But, like, I think that seeing that first off, like, put me in the right mindset to enjoy Stalker. I knew that it was going to be a slow movie, and I knew by reading people's reviews that it was, like, hard to understand, and maybe there was some sort of beauty in that. And so I entered the zone in that mindset of maybe not understanding exactly what the movie was about, but I was really surprised because my first reading of the movie after I sat with it for a bit was like instinctually like, this is about spirituality. Like, I immediately like felt that in the movie, and if I'm just basing it on that, I think that it's really effective in what it's trying to say about spirituality and in particular about Christianity. But I do think that it gets like a little bit lost in the sauce, like in the like middle of the film, where there's lots of like, to me, there's lots of like self-indulgent dialogue about like, is this really art, and what is mortality, and all of these other things that are being spun around with these three dudes as they're like hanging out. And it really like felt kind of like a parable to me. Like, it was kind of like, you know, a scientist or a professor and an author and their guide like walk into a bar. Like, what happens? Like, it almost felt like the way that the story was woven was like kind of like a parable. And so all of those things were kind of like, I don't know if you really need that in there, and perhaps it is distracting from the purpose of it. But after hearing Zach like talk about how the film was made, it makes sense that there was lots of muddling in all of that. But like visually, I think it's amazing, and if I'm just reading it based on the spirituality aspect, then I think that it's good.
I will say that the dialogue is something that really had me feeling locked out of Tarkovsky, on top of the slowness, when I've watched Solaris and then this as my first two movies from him. I remember my main critique being that like everybody in these movies sounds like they have a PhD in philosophy, which is kind of off-putting to me. But upon rewatching Stalker, I felt like there was a little bit less of that than there is in Solaris, though I still need to go revisit Solaris. But yes, I think you're exactly right that like reading this as a parable and a lot of this dialogue as the kind of dialogue you might read in either a parable or a holy text makes it a little bit more understandable in that context. Michael, Tarkovsky, sage among us.
Oh no. This is like one of the worst directors to say that you're a sage of. Surely there's more people out there who know more. But yeah, I mean, I think this is totally a parable or I mean, all the characters are basically metaphors. Because like at one point, like, I don't remember if it's the professor or the writer, but he's about to tell his name and he's like, but people just call me the writer. And like, I think that like is just a signal that like these characters are not meant to be like regular human beings you would meet off the street. These characters are stand-ins for like concepts or types of people. And so like for me at least, like it's interesting that these three characters meet, because you have the Stalker, who's basically like a priest or a believer of some kind. And then you have the writer, who is an artist, and who apparently gets lots of women. The movie is painted to stress to us many times. And then you have the professor who is like the skeptic, and who eventually is revealed to like have brought a bomb into the zone and is gonna. He and his colleagues have kind of agreed that they're gonna blow up the room. And I feel like that the dialogue and interactions among these three characters are meant to kind of be like representative of the dynamics among like those three concepts in like just like sociologically and like spiritually. So like how does spirituality and like religion, how does that interact with art? How does that interact with science?
Is it fair to say that you could reduce it to like the head and the heart and the soul?
That could be. I've also heard it named like the id, the ego, and the superego as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that that's like dead on. And I the first time I watched this was several years ago, and I think that a lot of the dialogue washed over me, and it didn't dawn on me that this was about spirituality until the end, when the stalker has returned to his wife, and he's just kind of like sitting there on the bed, like moaning about like how he doesn't know how to like function anymore because people don't actually care about belief anymore and that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden it like snapped into focus. I was like, oh, all this time this was supposed to be about spirituality. And then on rewatching it, this is my third time, like each time I think it's a little bit more resonant, like that each individual moment like does kind of contribute to like that general idea of like this being a microcosm of like how these giant like sociological forces intersect, or these giant psychological forces, if you want to frame it that way. And like so
for people who either haven't watched the movie or watched the movie and didn't understand that part, like you didn't halfway through your first watch, how would you kind of outline that allegory?
Yeah, so there's the zone, which is created by an object from outer space, which like, okay, so like if I'm already taking my like analogy as gospel here, like, you know, something comes from the sky and creates this magical place where you can be fulfilled, right? And so like I think like already that is like spiritual in nature, because it doesn't explore at all like the scientific realities of this. This is really just about like some mystical concept of like people come here to find some sort of like meaning.
And the writer explicitly talks about like wanting some sort of redemption or salvation in going to this place.
And then you have a person who has to guide you in, right? Like a priest or pastor, or just like some sort of like, you know, our like believer. And then when you get in there, you have like the scientist who wants to blow it up, which I mean, reductively, we could say that like, you know, stand in for like, you know, science could like nullify like mystical belief in a certain like way. You know, in the 21st century or the 20th century, that was kind of like a big idea. And then you have like the artist who is looking at it through like his artistic work has become meaningless for him without like some sort of, you know, larger meaning, and so he's seeking to like kind of take that to his own advantage. And then you have the stalker, who is like kind of interested in the journey itself and like the room and the zone as its own reward. And he's disappointed that like those who are around him are only interested in exploiting it or using it to ways that he's not interested in, which I think is like maybe...
Was there also something here about how the stalker can like walk them all the way up to the door, but they ultimately have to take the final step into the room and the other characters don't?
Yeah, exactly. And so like there is that like element of like whatever you want to call it, like there's a personal element to this, like, and the fact that like the room reflects your own personal desires, and it's revealed that it may not be like what you actually think that you want. It may just be, you know, what's truly in your heart, which may be horrifying to you. And I think that again, like that is like what like at least Christianity claims to be, and like God, you know, Christianity claims God to be, is that like, you know, in part like a revelatory force. Like you learn things about the world, or you learn things about yourself. And it's not necessarily something that you can sincerely engage with and, you know, come out with just pure, like, radiance or happiness or something like that. There's also like the more like culturally specific stuff. So like, Tarkovsky's in like Soviet Russia, which, has, kind of a contentious-ish. I don't know exactly the whole story, but like the relationship with organized religion is contentious, being a Marxist state. And so like in the movie, there's like the government is literally like locking the zone out for people, and you have to sneak in. There's also the idea that the zone is just full of these amazing location shots of like just crumbling infrastructure and like stuff. And I think that like, I mean, if I'm gonna like, I'm getting into like, maybe I'm extrapolating territory here, but like I think that was generally a feel among like European, or maybe, I mean, I don't know if we want to call Russia European, but sort of European Christianity in the 20th century, which is that like they're an institution that is like struggling to maintain like structural integrity because of like the like social forces at bay. And
there's like the beautiful pan through the river where you're like seeing all this junk that's kind of like halfway submerged in mud in the river, and one of those things is like a beautiful like iconographic painting of Jesus.
Right. And I think at that point there's a voiceover that's like directly quoting from the Book of Revelation, which is I can't remember the specific text, but it is about that sort of like apocalyptic end of the world kind of feeling of, the world is something that like Jesus has to come and like redeem and save, because it is like, crumbled into squalor in some way. And anyway, like, I mean, I could talk a lot about this movie. I feel like I've been talking a lot now, and I'll open it up.
Yeah, I also want to have a conversation about the end and the colors that we talked about this in person. But
real quickly before we shift over into, I do want to get, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but Jessica, how did you respond to kind of the religious allegory in Stalker?
Yeah, I was gonna say that Michael mentioned all the stuff about the room, but what was interesting to me about it is that it was like, you've traveled all this way, but you still have to really believe in it. Like, when you get in the room, you have to really believe that it will give you what you're asking for. And I think it's really interesting because the idea of praying is the same thing. Like, if you believe in that God will give you what you're asking for, then he will give it to you. And there have been so many times growing up where I've told people, yes, I prayed for this because I believe that God will give it to me. And they were like, well, what do you mean? Is he just going to give it to you? So if I pray for $1 million, is God just going to give me $1 million? And it was pretty much like the same thing. And then he goes, oh no, well, it's like the desires of your heart. So do you really desire $1 million? And do you really believe that God will give it to you? And so there are all these aspects of the room that are specifically tailored to Christianity and the way that we are told that praying works. And I thought that was really interesting. And also, I'm sure that we're all going to talk about what we think the ending of the film means, but to me it was the Stalker character was extremely upset when he got back home because he was like, people don't believe in things anymore. My job is meaningless. How can I guide people to this place of hope if nobody is going to believe in what I'm showing them? And you have his daughter, who is the perfect personification of faith, because she looks at the glass and believes that she can move it, and she does actually move it with her mind.
and crucially, that scene and another shot of the daughter being kind of carried into town is in color, which are the only shots in sort of the frame story on the beginning and the end of the film that are in color. Michael, you had a really good explanation of this when I asked you about it at your house.
Yeah, so the movie, when it's outside of the zone, is in this really lush sepia brownish yellow monochrome.
It's shining and gleaming.
Yeah, it's like the film stock was bathed in gold.
Yeah.
But it is monochrome, like it is not in like full color. But then when they enter the zone, it's suddenly like full color film. And then when they return to like outside of the zone, it goes back to the sepia, except for Andrew, like Andrew said, there are those shots of the daughter which are in full color. And then also the other exception is inside the zone, there are a few shots that are in the sepia, and those are like they're like the stalker is like thinking about things, and it's like maybe a dream shot or something like that. But like I think
the scene where he's quoting Revelation to himself and worrying about the end of civilization is in sepia.
Yeah. So like my initial thought when I saw the movie is like, I think this is a Wizard of Oz riff, because it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, and I don't know that it's not that, but also like if we're gonna tie it into the faith element, like what I think is happening is that like the stalker, when we see like those sepia shots inside the zone in color, is having a crisis of faith, and so like color is drained from the world for him, and because otherwise the zone is full of color, because that is supposed to be the place of faith, of spirituality, and when he's losing that, losing faith, it's gone, like drained of color. And then outside of the zone, which is like outside of the institutional place of faith, it's also drained of color, and except for when his daughter is in the shot, and especially that last shot when she's like using her mind powers to like move this glass across the table. And my thought is that like what this shows is that like the stalker's journey within the zone this time is showing like how the like human beings cannot believe of these like rituals and like institutional like traditional ways to achieve like spiritual meaning, right? Like that's this whole like crisis at the end, is that like I worked so hard to like make these people believe, but in the end they're not interested in that anymore. And if we want to like you make it more like literal, like he's worked so hard to get people to come to church or get people to like believe in like the Bible or God, like as Christian tradition says, and they just can't do it. And for the stalker, that means that he has taken them inside the zone, and the journey of being taken inside the zone doesn't result in any sort of spiritual awakening in these people. But like his daughter never goes into the zone, but still she is portrayed in color, which to me indicates that like his daughter presents like maybe the future of like real like Christianity or Christian meaning for Tarkovsky, which is that like it's not the institutional traditions of the like Christian belief. There's like something that is like fundamentally like more mysterious and more more unknowable, but also like maybe powerful too, that is not predicated on going into a certain place and doing a particular set of actions and these kind of arcane rituals. Which that was another thing I didn't bring up, is like they in the zone they like do this really roundabout like bizarre way to get around, like throwing these nuts with ribbons tied to them, and all the characters are like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And he's just like, you just got to do this or else bad things are going to happen to you, which like is like
it's like an empty ritual, right? Like he's only done it because he's seen other people do it.
And at one point like a guy like diverges from this ritual and he's like fine, and so like the trip into the zone, the trip into like the institution of religion, or is like full of these rituals that the other people don't understand and they don't care about, and like they get frustrated for a lot of reasons. But then at the end, like this girl, like she's like not part of those rituals at all, not part of like the zone or anything, but yet she still has like this powerful spirituality, and like it's like it seems like a deconstruction of like the prison or being shackled to tradition and institution for your faith. Maybe that's my thought.
There's a review on Letterboxd of this from Peter Labuza, who came on our podcast several weeks ago, where he says, I consider myself mostly an agnostic, but no film makes me want to believe in a faith more than Stalker. And I will echo that sentiment, like not only like the experience of watching the film, but also like that explanation of the film is so compelling to me and like persuasive as like a you know, a statement about the importance of faith and its you know, lack of connection to these sort of institutions.
I mean, I hear that, but also Michael's whole statement about masturbation in Christian movies earlier really got me going on.
Right. There could be more masturbation in
There
Stalker.
could be more masturbation in Stalker, but that's a whole other point.
That is why I have it only at 4.5 stars on Letterboxd rather than the full 5.
The half stars for Jesus.
Zach, what did you think of Stalker? Now that we're like 31 minutes into this talk.
I enjoyed it. It definitely was one that kind of you know, I did go in with the preconception that I'm probably not gonna like fully get what's going. I don't think it's something that you're ever supposed to get, but it's more like, let me get a handle on kind of just what it's all about first, and then I'll probably rewatch it with a little bit more understanding of kind of what's going on to appreciate it more. I got really I was really kind of, you know, swollen up in the there was the part where they're just, it's kind of the end of the I guess the first half or the first part or whatever, where they're just kind of, it's almost the roadside picnic part where they're just kind of wandering through the woods and chatting, and it doesn't really you know, get too in depth like what Jessica was talking about, where they just kind of almost, they're just kind of talking for talking's sake. Like it's just kind of like that meandering conversation of people wandering through the woods, just kind of, you know, talking just to kind of fill the void to an extent. And I really like those moments that you also just have those kind of serene moments where it's completely built on the imagery, where you just kind of get sucked up into this image of the water that's kind of just sitting there rippling, and you kind of can feel like those poisonous edges to it. Like it doesn't feel like some pure water source. It's just kind of like this somewhat tainted area. The other thing I was thinking about, and I ironically kind of watched a documentary today that kind of brought up this point, but the thing that I had the biggest takeaway with is the sound design of this movie. It seems like this is kind of something that's pervasive in Tarkovsky's work, but I mean, this is the first thing I've seen, so I don't know, but it just felt like it really creates this soundscape around you. Like, it's not just the score and it's not just specific sound effects. It's just kind of this pervasive noises that feel somewhat ambient, but just also like natural within the space. And so you just kind of feel like you're enveloped with everything around you on screen and off in a way that felt different from other movies that I've watched.
There is an entire chapter in Tarkovsky's book Sculpting in Time called Music and Noises. So I think he took great pains to like make that part of the movie as evocative as possible.
The documentary I was watching earlier is about the life of Ryuichi Sakamoto, and he was talking about how much he loved. He talked extensively about the music and sound design in Solaris, as well as I guess Tarkovsky uses a lot of chorals from Bach, and he was talking about how he used that and how it influenced some of his work, including something like The Revenant recently.
Worth noting, I mean, most of this movie is either like ambient noise or like a like kind of like a what would you describe the score as? It's like ambient krautrock kind of sounding stuff.
There's like it's like a theremin. It's like a theremin heavy score, right? Or at the very least, like a very interesting sounding modular synth. It sounds like a sci-fi movie, which is kind of
it sounds like early electronic music in a way. But then at the end, that last shot that we were talking about earlier, you get like a clip of like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, like the Ode to Joy. chorus, and like that's like the only like recognizable piece of music like inside the movie, which like again that shot is cool, but like
artificial music versus organic music. Maybe there's some sort of connection there between what you were talking about earlier about like the idea of the zone as like this institutional place where faith has to lie, and that being sort of a fiction. As opposed to the way in which faith sort of lives inside this person, and that is more organic.
And not just organic versus electronic or artificial, but like just the text of that song is like a praise to God, basically.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but man, this movie is a vibe and a half, though, Zach. Like, I totally agree. Just like, even if this movie meant nothing, like it would just be just a tremendous aesthetic experience, like with the sound and like the images and just like I just love the ruins porn. Like this is like the best location scouting of all time, where they just found like a field full of like decaying like Soviet tanks, like taken over by nature, and it's just great. I love that stuff.
I mean, it is plucked right out of Zelda Breath of the Wild, all those decayed tanks.
Well, clearly it almost killed them, so I don't know if I'm gonna like super praise the set design. I absolutely agree. I was very concerned because it was one of those, I just worked a full day and now 3-hour Soviet movie.
Right.
But I did like I'll admit that I phased in and out a little bit at some parts just because I don't know, it was more of a focus issue. That's my problem. But overall, I mean, it's I don't know. I guess Michael will have to send me some Tarkovsky recommendations on a path to follow.
Well, he only has like 7 or 8 movies, so.
Well, I don't know if there's a path that you want me to take.
Ivan's Childhood is the best.
Yeah, Ivan's Childhood is
Ivan's
like
Childhood's
the kind of like classical and accessible one, I would say. That was the.
It's also short. It's his only movie that's under 2 hours, I think. Well, maybe Mirror, but.
That was the movie that I saw of his where like it was the first one of his I liked after watching Solaris and Stalker and not liking them. I would also say though, if you're down for something that's more along the lines of Stalker, and maybe Michael will back me up on this, Nostalgia is really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is my favorite Tarkovsky movie. And that has a lot of the same like ruins. They're like in Italy, and so it's like this old like in this town, there's like old Roman architecture that they're like walking around a lot. Lots of water too. But I watched the movies, when I first got into Tarkovsky, I watched the movies chronologically, which is not a terrible way to watch them, with the exception of his longest movie is his second one. And in some ways his most dense, like Andrei Rublev. It's like over 3 hours long. But otherwise, like starting with Ivan's Childhood, I think is like a good starting point.
Well, it was a good start, and I will explore. I'm going to explore him some more. I'm glad that we finally got to get to one of his work on Cemetery, because it's been a while.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I believe that will wrap up this episode. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Also, check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/Cinematary. We will have a new Film Theory and Chill coming up, hopefully pretty soon, since we're getting close to the middle of August. But thank you so much to our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Cindy Roberts, Harry Eskin, Hell Yeah Small World, Joe Jordan, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Pedro Seraphim, Ron Hayes, the kittiest of kittens, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1987's RoboCop. Which luckily has no relevance to current events. It's also...
Can we confirm that we have a guest, or can we not confirm that we have a guest?
We don't have any confirmation on the guest yet. But I can confirm that it is not a biopic of the Democratic vice president.
Wow.
Can you rent the movie for $1? I feel like that'd be nice.
We'll work all that stuff into the episode. Don't worry. Well, and again, make sure to go to cinematary.com. We got some new reviews up. We mentioned Courtney's thoughts on Black as King, and then read Jessica's full written review on She Dies Tomorrow. But until then, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.